Hello, I am Ian Humphreys and welcome to UKMFA TV. And if you're coming back as a rejoiner, it's lovely to see you. And if you're new, well, welcome to the channel. Our main channel's on Rumble, but you can also catch us on YouTube and other platforms too. And on audio, you'll find us, well, on Spotify, Apple, etc. Now, we're going to be talking today with the fabulous Elizabeth Hart. Now, she's an independent researcher investigating the vaccine industry and conflicts of interest in vaccine policy. She's been questioning the ever-increasing number of vaccine products and revaccinations on the taxpayer-funded womb-to-tomb vaccine schedule. During the COVID years, she undertook extensive correspondence seeking accountability for the grossly disproportionate and challenging vaccine mandates and the evidence for the so-called emergency. Joining me to talk to her and leading on most of the conversation is our CEO, Dr. Liz Evans. And right in the middle of our conversation, a very, very important presentation is going to be given by Elizabeth Hart. And we'll also clip that out separately in case you want to watch that on its own and share it. But of course, you'll share the entire video, I'm sure. I don't think there's any point in me rambling on anymore because you are going to want to listen to Elizabeth Hart. Welcome to another broadcast by the UK Medical Freedom Alliance, the UK's most recognised and respected organisation advocating for every individual's right to informed consent, bodily autonomy and medical choice. We are the UK's voice of ethical medicine.
Good morning, everyone, and we're absolutely delighted to have today with us Elizabeth Hart, who is probably the most distant guest we've had, all the way from the other side of the world, from Australia. And I don't even know which part of Australia, so I'm sure she'll tell us shortly. So I've known Elizabeth through various informed consent WhatsApp groups. She is an absolutely passionate campaigner for informed consent and medical ethics. And she describes herself as an independent researcher investigating the vaccine industry and conflicts of interest in vaccine policy. And this has been going on for quite a while, since about 2008. So she's got a lot of background and did a lot of work in this sort of domain before even COVID started. But she's been an absolute Trojan during COVID. She produces lots of work, comes out on Substack and various, she's got a website, and I think she must work full time because she seems to produce the most prodigious output of information and investigation. So without further ado, welcome to the UKMFA podcast, Elizabeth, and just tell us, where are you exactly, and tell us a little bit about your background.
Well, I'm in Adelaide in South Australia. And got into this caper with pet vaccination. One of our dogs became very ill after a vaccine back in 2008, and then they subsequently put her down. And this was quite a shocking experience because we'd had a dog in the past who lived to a fine old age and actually hadn't been vaccinated. I think this vaccines for pets came in the early 2000s or whatever, I'm not sure. But anyway, that set me off on this path, and we were quite successful with pet vaccination. We got in the Choice consumer magazine here because they're vaccinating pets every year with live vaccines and inactivated vaccines. So it's just really sort of a money-making racket. And it's really interesting to compare now with human vaccination because it has gone completely mad with all these flu vaccines and COVID vaccines and shingles and pneumococcal. It's just gone crazy. And it's like this COVID has to be the opportunity to throw the spotlight on this and see what is going on here.
Yeah, and I know you've been very interested in sort of diving deep into the corruption and, you know, the business model that is serving these big pharmaceutical companies, but not serving the public or in the past the animals. You know, whatever it is, this has become a multi-trillion-dollar industry, hasn't it? But you've been very good at looking into sort of the people and the conflicts and the corruption.
Yeah, it's surprising to find just how conflicted it is. You know, the people who are influencing policy around the world, but in Australia, for example, well, a lot of them have got connections with the pharmaceutical industry. They're involved in vaccine clinical trials because they're specialists in this area, but they're very reluctant to properly disclose their conflicts of interest. And what we're seeing is there's just an enormous amount of vaccines on the schedule for children now. And I think people just really realize just how many vaccines are on there. And in Australia, a big thing for us was the no jab, no pay law that was put in place in 2016. This was after the Murdoch media was campaigning for coercive vaccination for children. It wanted all children to be vaccinated. And of course, a lot of people support this. A lot of people support children's vaccination, but they don't realize these are products, and children are being set up to be fodder for everything that's coming out of this, situation. So, and the Murdoch media, so this is Rupert Murdoch's empire. His mother founded an organisation in Australia called the Murdoch Children's Research Institute, and it's involved in vaccine research, and it was involved in COVID vaccine research during COVID. So that is a massive conflict of interest there. And when they were doing their campaign for children's vaccination, I don't think that was disclosed. And of course, politicians are very responsive to Murdoch demands because they don't want negative publicity. So back in those days, 2015, Scott Morrison, who was the Prime Minister during COVID, he was a social services minister, and he was responsible for putting up the no jab, no pay bill, which resulted in the no jab, no pay law. And he had lunch with Rupert Murdoch that year. He also succeeded in becoming Prime Minister of Australia, and I think that might be hard to do without Murdoch's support. So he was in situ for when COVID came, and he was really behind this whole mandatory vaccination push. And that's what I really want to bring out, that's what's been saddled in Australia. It's a really grim situation.
Yeah, and I know we won't sort of do any spoilers because you've got a really detailed presentation on this, but no job, no pay in 2016, that sounds pretty draconian, and sort of that was not an experience that we would have had over here.
This was for children's vaccination. It was particularly not adults at that stage. It was no jab, no pay, and this was really about maternity allowances that were paid to families, and it was like, oh well, to get financial benefits, to get tax benefits, your children will need to be vaccinated, and then that progressed into no jab, no play for getting into childcare and what have you. But the thing is, this is a coercive, incentivizing intervention, and the medical profession should have been on this straight away and said, we won't be able to collaborate with mandates or coercion. But they didn't. They went along with it. And because of that, that set the base for what happened during COVID. And it's like living in a massive ash experiment in that you've just got all these people going along with this, and it's wrong. And there's so many people complicit, the mainstream media, the medical profession, obviously, scientists, the legal system, even the churches. Everybody went along with this, and critical thinking just went right out the window. You are not allowed to ask questions about this because, in the UK and around the world, there's been a plot going on for years to shut down any questioning of vaccination. So that was in place. And of course, they try to call it misinformation and disinformation, whereas this is a medical intervention that's paid for by taxpayers. We should be able to question this without any problem at all. But that's not what's been happening. And so this is all part of the thing that's got to be exposed.
Yeah. I mean, I love Australia. If I didn't live in the UK, I would want to live in Australia. It's got a really special place in my heart. And I was watching, absolutely horrified at what was going on in parts of Australia. I mean, during COVID, particularly, Victoria was horrific, wasn't it? Northern Territory was bad.
And it was all bad. All of Australia was bad.
Yeah, you were a captive population in a sense, weren't you? Because you're a small population for the size of landmass, but there's only one way out, isn't there, by plane? And when I visited Australia a few years ago, I wonder if this is a sort of in your psyche thing, in your history, that the first place we stayed when we arrived in Australia was Quarantine Station in Sydney, which was in the actual historic quarantine station where when the settlers would arrive, they'd be put in this sort of isolated camp on the sort of the head of the harbour, where they would have a hospital and doctors and nurses, but they would have to stay there for 6 to 8 weeks. If they survived, then they could come in because they would have got rid of any diseases, but if they died, they died. So I felt like there was a slightly siege mentality within the Australian psyche that really believed that they could keep out any disease that they wanted. I don't know whether you resonate with that, but
I
I
do.
found it really striking at the time, and it didn't then surprise me that Australia believed they could keep this out because they'd done this historically.
I think it's complicated because, of course, well, it was a convict nation. It was settled here with convicts and what have you. So it's almost got a mentality. It's not just about convicts, it's also about prison guards. So we've got a bit of that mentality of people watching what other people are doing and prepared to complain about it. But it was complicated because during COVID, because it was out there that this supposed, I question really what was really going on with this COVID, but it wasn't a problem for most people. That was acknowledged from the beginning by the likes of the WHO and what have you. And so in the population, there was definitely a feeling that a lot of people weren't going to get this vaccine. And the government was sensing this, and there was a sort of desperation on the government's part that it wanted everybody to get the vaccine, that was going to do anything to make people get this vaccine. It was very sinister. I feel Australia is like a test bed for this sort of thing. We're also, I think we're one of the only English speaking countries in the world that has compulsory voting. There's a real compulsory, you have to vote in the elections, or you have to turn up to a booth and sign your name off, but it's coercion to vote. So you can almost be voting for your own demise with the likes of these parties and what have you. So I think it's part of a bigger picture of coercion, almost experimenting with people to see how much you control them and make them submissive to government demands.
Yeah, and when I visited before COVID, I noticed lots of public health signs up everywhere. Like, it felt quite nanny state-ish. Like, you were always being warned, wherever you were, of the dangers and, what you needed to do. And it was different to the UK. So I think, as you say, the stage was set. COVID came in, and through all of these other things that had happened, you were really, sort of there as the test case for mandatory vaccination, which I know you want to talk about. So, without further ado,
if I can just mention, and I think another big feature here is because in England, when they tried to bring in mandatory COVID vaccination in England, there were enough people in the NHS to jump up and say, no, we're going to walk if that happens, and it all fell over. But in Australia, medical practitioners have been mandatory vaccinated for years. They've been submitting to vaccines themselves for years. And I think that's a major issue, along with the children's vaccination. This idea that is the idea of they're doing it for the good of society. But it means they don't understand informed consent for vaccination because they aren't even capable of fighting it for themselves. And, they've got military people submitted. So we've had these vaccine mandates in place for a long time. And it's just become a rote process. It's almost like they don't realise this is actually a medical intervention. It's a very substantial medical intervention because it's given to mass populations for illnesses that might not be a problem for most people. We've had people here who were subjected to compulsory vaccination to visit family in aged care. For a while, the flu vaccines were mandatory. Obviously, aged care people were having to, so there's a real culture here that's been allowed to be embedded. And people like me who question it are regarded as nutters. And it's like we've got to say, no, this is a medical intervention. And you've been quashing discussion on this for years. And now that's why we're in this unbelievable mess, because the medical profession has collaborated with these mandates for years. And it's destroyed voluntary informed consent. And really, it's so significant because I'm saying there is no valid consent for vaccination at all, because they never obtain it properly. It's like a huge thing waiting to be the lid for it to blow off.
Yeah, I think you make a really important point. I think when you have healthcare workers whose own bodily autonomy is not respected and who don't have the luxury of informed consent, you've completely warped medical ethics. So then, the abused become the abusers, because it is abusive not to be allowed to decide what happens to your body. But if they are only allowed to work if they submit to whatever the government decides they have to be, injected with, how can we then expect them to, honour other people's bodily autonomy? Because so it feels like medical ethics has almost been completely changed and subverted and warped in Australia to the point where no one would stand up for the public. And yet, of course, as you say, this is a medical intervention. If the side effect happens to you, and we know all medical interventions have side effects, it happens to you 100%. and nobody thanks you, and nobody comes and picks up the pieces, and you're on your own. And that's what's so utterly morally bankrupt about this whole situation.
Yeah, and it's not even about side effects or safe and effective or whatever. It's whatever. You get to make the final decision about what happens to your body. If you decide, I think this threat that might be around, I think my body can handle it. And if other people want the vaccines, believe in the vaccines, well, you have the vaccine to protect you. But what this idea that everybody has to be injected protects everybody else, that has got to be quashed. You know, everybody's entitled to thought. We're supposed to be living in free countries here. And Australia I'm just horrified about Australia. You know, you were saying, you know, in 2020, I was in gobsmacked awe the entire time. It was so horrifying. Thought we've got no checks and balances here. We've got no protections. They've called this emergency. And I was writing letters to the government when I was always writing letters. You know, I was writing and asking, what is this emergency? What is it? And who are these people? Who are these so-called experts? Who are they? And what are their qualifications? And we weren't getting any answers. So this thing has been complete beat up to create this massive vaccine market and to make populations compliant to government dictates. It's just the most shocking thing.
Yeah, and what's particularly shocking is there was no evidence of COVID, was there, really, in Australia? Not severe. There was no kind of big waves of deaths going on from COVID, which they could use to kind of persuade you that, you know, you had an existential crisis. I know people who've looked at the data often say Australia is a great test case because actually all the excess deaths started when the vaccine started, because you really hadn't had much to talk about during 2020.
Well, that's what I was finding.
How did they pull it off?
Well, because I've been researching this for so long, so I've been working on this since 2008. I've been looking at measles, and there was the Zika scare, there was the Ebola scare. I've seen this playbook so many times. I think the measles outbreak in Samoa was another test case for a dystopian response to a so-called outbreak. So from the get-go, I didn't believe in this at all, just because of what I've been doing for years. I knew what was going to happen. They're going to close the border, and they're going to claim that has saved us from the virus. And around the world, it was all this PCR testing. Perfectly well people without symptoms being described as asymptomatic because they had a positive test. It was doctors' diagnostic skills were out the window. You know, people used to go to a doctor because they were sick. And now we have people being diagnosed as sick with nothing wrong with them and being told to be quarantined. This is the most incredible thing that's happened. In Australia, the entire country was imprisoned. We were not allowed to leave this country for 2 years, unless you were a VIP or a film star or a politician. No, the plebs, all the peasants were locked in here. It's absolutely incredible what's happened in this country. This is the most huge crime of imprisonment. You know, we were held hostage here for so-called respiratory ailments, which aren't a problem for most people, which this year they call COVID. I'm just completely astonished. And there's got to be accountability for this, for the people who carried this out.
Yeah, and of course it was the Australian government who made the case for Djokovic. You know, they were the ones that made the big. You know, he couldn't come in and compete in the Australian Open. No, none of the other countries quite went that far, did they? But Australia were prepared to literally kick him out and say no and make a massive example of him. The sort of scapegoat.
But they've been doing this for years. You see, for years there were people who were coming. You know, Polly Tommy. She's a person who questions vaccines, and Kent Heckenlively. There have been other people, Suzanne Humphreys, who tried to come to the country just to talk about vaccines, and they've been banned. So this country is such a censoring country. Will decide what people can talk about. It's already got this history of shutting out people who aren't going to comply to what's being set up here. That's why I say I really do think this is a test case for vaccine mandates. And it's just astonishing what they've gotten away with. And it's now got to come out into the light and be examined.
Yeah. Now, before we start the presentation, Ian, is there anything you wanted to ask at this point?
No, not right now, because there are things in the presentation that are going to trigger some of my questions for later. But no, that's I'm really interested to hear this a bit more. Now I've seen it a couple of times. I really want to hear it now.
Yeah, it's the world exclusive of Elizabeth's on the situation, the dire situation in Australia, and how we're going to sort it out, hopefully.
Oh, good. Let's the three of us get it sorted.
Yeah, so, we're just going to sit back now and let you take over and just listen to you for about half an hour.
Please consider donating to the UKMFA. We are really grateful for all donations, no matter how small. Your donations enable us to continue to lobby for your right to informed consent and medical freedom to be upheld, and to provide resources to educate and empower the public. There are multiple options for donating. One is that you can scan the QR code that's on this video right now, or you can go to the link that is featured in the description below this video, or you can go onto our website and contribute via donor box, or you can buy us a coffee.
Okie dokie. Well, so my little sides there are visible now, I suggest. So you can guess, if you can see the slide there, you can see that picture, the dystopian picture of the sort of mafia henchman, leaning over the poor person in the chair saying, no jab, no job, no jab, no life. That's what's happened in Australia. And we can see how this is the medical profession here, the robotic nurse who's just going to do as she's told and give the injection. And behind the sort of senior medical people, like the chief medical officer and what have you, they're all behind this. So this is what we've been dealing with in Australia. It's just been so shocking. If the medical profession hadn't gone along with this, it would have all fallen over. It's the fact that they collaborated with mandates. They should have resisted this from the very beginning. They should have said, no, we can't do this, but they didn't. So, and now here we are. So I've just gone to the next slide. So we've just had a chat now previously about no jab, no play and pay and job and life and what have you. And I described all that. Also, I've just mentioned about Jane Halton. She was a former Australian bureaucrat who's now the chair of the Coalition for Epidemic Preparedness and Innovation, CEPI, which is basically the front of the pandemic industry. And she's got a lot of other sort of very influential jobs as well. But here she was in 2020, May 2020. There were no vaccines out there at this stage. She's already calling for a mandate. She's got a massive conflict of interest, and she's calling for the mandate, no jab, no play for adults. And she's on the COVID Commission. She's an advisor to Morrison, who's the Prime Minister. And we can see here in August 2020, he's on the radio talking about the COVID situation. And he's saying he's expecting that the COVID vaccine will be as mandatory as you can possibly make it. So that's August 2020. No vaccines out there yet, but it's already set in play. It's going to be mandatory. And the Rupert Murdoch situation, the Murdoch media was atrocious here, absolutely driven by the COVID narrative. My family is a subscriber to the Australian newspaper, and which has comments on articles, and comments were just being censored all the time. So the people in Australia were forbidden for really contributing to this situation. It was affecting us, but where was our platform to speak? We were just being terrorised the whole time, public health terrorism with this whole beat up COVID thing, and being set up to be fodder for the vaccine market. Just try and get the next slide. So I'm sort of presenting this as a timeline to show what happened in Australia. So here we are now, March 21. And this is the AHPRA position statement. AHPRA is the regulator of the practitioners, so similar to the GMC in the UK. And here we are. They were being set up from the get-go. This is a position statement which is now superseded, but it was laying down the law to the practitioners, which was basically get vaccinated, get everybody else vaccinated, and don't ask any questions or you're toast. It was referred to as the gag order because it was saying anything anti-vaccination and you're done for, and you'll be subject to investigation and possible regulatory action. And there were a few doctors at the beginning who were questioning this. They were, people were going to them begging for exemptions for the vaccination. Exemptions are something which have been in place in Australia for years for vaccination, and yet they're very hard to get, and they shouldn't even exist because you're supposed to be giving your voluntary informed consent to this. How can you get an exemption for something you... So the situation in Australia is an absolute dire shambles, and it is way past time that this got exposed. So that was, here we have got the scene set in March 21. They're being set up. They are being conscripted to support the vaccine rollout. So now let's go to June 21. And we've got, this is the Australian Health Protection Principal Committee. This is really the committee of the health officers around Australia and the States. And they're led by the chief medical officer at the time was Paul Kelly. This is a highly influential group. They're basically running the show for COVID because they're giving the medical advice to the politicians and the Governor General about how to handle this. And we were in a rolling emergency for years. The Governor General just kept rolling this emergency over, which was putting us on restrictions all the time. And, as I said before, I wrote to ask what was the definition of this emergency, got no response. We never really found out what it was. But here we are in June 21, and these are people who are registered medical practitioners. They're all on AHPRA, the people who are on this committee. And in 4th of June 21, they were saying that they didn't recommend compulsory vaccines for aged care workers, because this was what was out in the community, this idea that the elderly are at risk, so the people who work with them should be vaccinated. Seems to make sense. But those workers are entitled to consent too. And I think this was part of the global plan, because you had the same thing in England, where the aged care workers, were the first in the frame to get compulsory vaccination, and eventually fell over there, I think. But here they're saying we don't recommend it. But also on the 4th of June, we've got Scott Morrison. It's reported on the ABC News. He wants to go against this health advice on COVID vaccinations. He wants it to be compulsory. And this is publicly announced, he is going to lobby state and territory leaders to overrule the medical experts' advice and to force aged care workers, that's how it was reported in the media, force aged care workers to get the coronavirus vaccine. So this is an obvious political move by Morrison, that he is determined for this to happen. So now we'll go to the 28th of June 21. And indeed, it has come to pass. National Cabinet have agreed that the COVID-19 vaccines are to be mandated for the residential aged care workers as a condition of working in an aged care facility. This now is an example of no jab, no job. This is what's going to open the floodgates on this. But look at this, 29th of June 21, now we have the AHPPC, which had originally rejected compulsory vaccination for the aged care workers, not just once, but on a number of occasions. Now on the 29th of June, after National Cabinet have already made this announcement, they are now saying they recommend to National Cabinet that the workforce be vaccinated as a condition of working in the facility. So this is actually a rubber stamp. We have got the so-called medical experts are rubber stamping a political decision. And this is picked up on, the Australian Nursing and Midwifery Federation on the 29th of June as well. They say that they're concerned that mandating vaccinations for the aged care workforce could be a political decision, not a health decision. So they have nailed it straight away. This is what it was. So with this happening, this has now opened the floodgates. They've broken the principle of valid voluntary informed consent. You've either got it for everybody or you haven't. If there's any mandates for anybody, everybody is at risk now because the principle has been broken. So this opened the floodgates. And now we're in the situation that 73.3 million COVID vaccine doses have been administered in Australia. This is in a hostile climate of intimidation, of threats. You will lose your job. You won't be able to go to the gym or go to the restaurant or go to the pub or travel if you don't have this vaccine. That's what's happening. So in my opinion, there is now no valid voluntary informed consent for COVID-19 vaccination. It's impossible to get in this. So they have shattered informed consent. So now we'll look at July, August. So what had happened in Australia was in March 2020, the restrictions said, the old 2 weeks or whatever it was to flatten the curve. In Australia, it was the Doherty Institute that was behind the modelling to putting us into lockdown, Jodie McVernon in particular. And this was influenced by the Neil Ferguson modelling from Imperial College London. They influenced our modelling. So this was all this sort of situation with social distancing and all that. So this was now all these restrictions have been put in place. And now the vaccines are coming, which is what Ferguson had said. People will have to be restricted and locked down until the vaccines are available. And so this is what was planned. Now they were rolling out the vaccines. They were sensing that the public was not going to respond and get vaccinated. So now they put together a plan. How are we going to get out of this hole we've been dug into with restrictions? And the plan was at least 80% of the population 16 years and over had to be vaccinated. So now we have a situation where to get out of restrictions, you will have to be vaccinated. And they actually come up with the idea of freedom incentives. So if you're not vaccinated, you're not going to have the restrictions lifted. It's mind-boggling. As I'm an unvaccinated person, as you might imagine, and I lived it in that I wasn't allowed to travel. I wasn't allowed, South Australia wasn't as bad as the other states. We could go to restaurants and what have you, but we were restricted in a lot of ways. We couldn't play sports, golf, couldn't travel, couldn't go to the theatre. You were a leper. So they've set up a two-tier society, and it othered you with other people. You were now these people who were not submitting and doing the right thing. You were a critical thinker, but there were a lot of people who didn't want to do it, but were coerced into it because of the restrictions. So we've got a nudge unit in Australia, just like you have in England. So we have this is now the Australian government's behavioural economics team. They were providing advice to the government, and they were suggesting providing vaccinated people with personal freedoms and restricting the freedoms of those who aren't is likely to drive vaccine uptake. I mean, how blatant is that? That is absolutely outrageous. And that, very important to notice, this is the Australian government that was doing this. So they're basically setting up the situation for mandates. But there's something else happening now. July 21, you will recall AstraZeneca vaccine. The clots were coming. And so now the medical practitioners are a little bit worried about this. I don't think they're too worried about the patients. They're worried about liability issues, about what could unfold here with liability issues. And so we've now got the government desperate to get everybody jabbed. And now we've got this hassle coming out with the AstraZeneca vaccines. What are we going to do? If they lose the practitioners, they're going to lose this rollout. So they announced, don't worry, there's an indemnity scheme that's going to protect you. And it's just sort of assuring them. And it's all about supporting the increased vaccine uptake. That's what this is about. And sort of assuring everybody that the practitioners will have the appropriate indemnity coverage. And this happens there's another announcement made in August. Same thing. The main thing is it's the crucial role in the vaccine rollout. And there must be assurance that the claim scheme will offer them protection. So this is basically, I suggest the government was lying to the practitioners in that they don't necessarily have the protection that they might think they have. Now, while this is all going on, I'm there beavering away as a little letter writer that I have been for years. So as part of the letters I was writing was because I could see this coming. I could see all through June 2020, I was writing to the British Medical Journal, got quite a few rapid responses published, writing to all and sundry. So in Australia, I could see how informed consent was looking very, very shaky. So I was writing to the main organisations, the Medical Board of Australia, AHPRA, the regulator, the colleges, the Royal Australian College of General Practitioners, and the Royal Australasian College of Physicians, and also the Australian Medical Association. Now, I wasn't getting any answers out of these people, but I kept writing away. And so this is now June to September, those letters are going out. But remember, they want everybody vaccinated. And for example, in Victoria, as you recognise, one of the worst places in the world for this, on the 6th of September 21, it's announced there's going to be a vaccinated economy. And if you want to participate in that economy, you're going to have to be vaccinated. They're going to lock out people who are not vaccinated. You couldn't do anything in Victoria without being vaccinated. I mean, like, seriously, you couldn't go to a hairdresser, you couldn't go golfing, you couldn't go to the restaurant, and of course, jobs. And the employers, companies, were facing enormous fines of thousands of dollars if they had unvaccinated people on their premises. It was huge what was going on. And I still remain astonished that everybody was going along with this, that we didn't somehow have the wherewithal to rise up against this. But the public health terrorists had done such a good job with their terrorism that a lot of people really believed that they were really scared about this. And they weren't just scared for themselves, were people worried about vulnerable loved ones. So they were really doing a job on the people, really terrorizing them. But you just think about medical people doing that. to the public. It's just an awful situation. But then, surprise, I got a response. I got a response from AHPRA. And this is dated the 20th of September 21. So I get this letter from AHPRA after all those letters I'd written about informed consent. And this letter is confirming to me practitioners have an obligation to obtain informed consent for treatment, including vaccination. Informed consent is a person's voluntary decision about healthcare that is made with knowledge and understanding of the benefits and risks involved. Now, this is AHPRA. This is a letter to me. This is contemporary to the times. We are in a society which is now subject to mandates, the vaccinated economy. Where is AHPRA? Where is their position statement warning the practitioners do not collaborate with mandates? You must get informed consent. They write this letter to me, and yet the mandate's going on. AHPRA is a disaster area, and the medical board. When are they going to get brought to account for what they've done? It's an absolute shambles. And this isn't the only correspondence I've got with AHPRA, because as you know, I had been challenging no jab, no pay back in 2016. So when that law came in, I was writing to AHPRA, and I got a letter back from them, actually from the Chief Executive Officer, Martin Fletcher, who's only recently walked from AHPRA. Maybe you might see what they're writing on the wall in the future. But in October 2017, he then wrote to me confirming a medical practitioner must obtain informed consent before undertaking an examination or providing treatment, including providing vaccines. And he was confirming then that the new law that had come in does not mandate vaccinations and consent is still required. But that's not what was happening in reality. Parents were being coerced to submit to the vaccination schedule. They were basically not in a situation to question any of the vaccines for the young children. It was particularly for the young children that this was happening. So I need to point that out. But it just became a culture of you must comply with vaccination requirements. Now, these are the types of doctors that we've got around the place. This is the 10th of November 21 now. This is the rollout is in play. They are determined to get people vaccinated. And we've got doctors like this. This is Chris Perry. He was the president of the Queensland AMA at the time. I think he's some sort of neck doctor. He is not an expert in vaccines, but they use these people, the AMA president or whatever, and they're using their status to impress the public. So he's on a sort of, news program in the morning, spouting off about how everybody's going to have to get the vaccine. This is just, he went on, and this is just one quote from him. He was saying, so get vaccinated, otherwise you're going to have a very, very lonely life, and you're not going to be able to maintain your employment. That is intimidation. This is a doctor rolled out in public for millions of people in Australia, terrorising them into, you better get vaccinated, otherwise you're not going to be able to do anything, and you're not going to have your job. I mean, that is just outrageous. I think you will agree. But now we come to the 11th of November 21. And my colleague Emma MacArthur, we've been chatting and we were wondering, how's this claim scheme going to work? What's the situation on informed consent and what have you? So she worked with another person who was interested in this legal side of things, and she came up with this very good short letter to the health minister. Please could you advise to what extent the Commonwealth COVID-19 vaccine claim scheme provides insurance and indemnity for the civil and criminal liability that would arise where battery and clinical negligence occur due to a failure to obtain valid informed consent? That's a pretty little, scary little question, I think, for the government to get. And she gets a response from the government fairly swiftly. If you've ever tried writing to the government, you might wait around for quite some time. But here's a letter that turns up just a month later. And this letter confirms, actually, the scheme does not provide an indemnity for practitioners or insurers. It's only providing a claim scheme for people who are injured. So this is not the same thing at all as giving blanket liability protection to the vaccinators. And this letter includes this solid gold sentence. Informed consent should be obtained for every COVID-19 vaccination as per usual consent procedures for other vaccinations. Now, as you know, I'm a letter writer, and people say to me sometimes, what is the point of all your letters? And I say, actually, I get some pretty interesting responses sometimes, and that's all I need. That sentence is absolutely rock solid gold. Simple, informed consent should be obtained. That's it. And yet, at the same time that letter was sent to Emma MacArthur, there were mandates in place. The Australian government is acknowledging that you have to get informed consent, but at the same time, the Australian government, in the shape of the Prime Minister and the National Cabinet and the Chief Medical Officer, is behind people being mandated to have vaccines. That's a shambles. The same letter included, it mentioned the Australian Immunisation Handbook, which has information about valid consent, including criteria for consent to be legally valid. Now, it didn't spell it out in this letter, but if we go to the Immunisation Handbook, it's very straightforward. For consent to be legally valid, I'm picking out the key sentences here. It must be given voluntarily in the absence of undue pressure, coercion, or manipulation. It can only be given after the potential risks and benefits of not having it and any alternative options have been explained to the person. When was that happening? People were just being told to roll up like a herd of cattle at vaccination clinics and just have some needles stuck in them while somebody hasn't got a clue what they're doing. It's just such a shambles. It takes my breath away every time I think about it. But now look at this curious little fact sheet. This is now dated 15th of December 21, and this is what you call a classic example of gaslighting. This is a fact sheet that has been put out by the Australian government in between Emma McArthur sending her letter and her getting a response from the government. I wonder if it might have had anything to do with it. I don't know. But this fact sheet has got this curious title: Handling Consent Refusal by People Presenting for Vaccination. So here we have these practitioners who've got people presenting for vaccination, but they don't want it. So that's a very curious situation to be in, isn't it? And this fact sheet is giving the practitioner advice. It's a Q&A here. So it's saying the practitioners could ask the question, can I vaccinate a patient if they are mandated to receive a vaccination? And the fact sheet saying a patient must provide informed consent prior to vaccination. If a patient has not provided informed consent, you should not vaccinate them, even if they are mandated to receive a COVID-19 vaccination to perform particular roles or enter certain settings. I mean, that is just an incredible fact sheet. How many practitioners actually even saw this thing? Because anybody would look at this and with any critical thinking whatsoever would say, what is going on? There's mandates in place. The practitioners should be just saying straight away, I cannot vaccinate anybody who's coming to here with a mandate in place because they're under duress. Straight away, it's not going to be legitimate. And here's a bit more of this fact sheet. So here they're saying the patient wants to debate topics around vaccines and vaccination, and so the response should be, I cannot engage in this conversation with you in a professional capacity. This is somebody who's supposed to be getting informed consent for vaccination, but they're not allowed to engage in conversation on the product. And, then you say, if you would like to receive a COVID-19 vaccination, this is the person who's turned up under duress, who doesn't want to consent, you must provide informed consent. It's like you might as well have a robot there in front of you. And then the patient informs you they must get vaccinated to remain employed, but do not provide informed consent. As a health professional, I cannot comment on vaccine mandates. I mean, that is an astonishing situation. They should not be collaborating. They should be out front and foremost saying, we cannot collaborate with vaccine mandates. This just goes to show you how these people have been controlled, that they are incapable of calling out something which is so terrible in medical practice, an absolute gross, breakdown in medical ethics. So anyway, so time moves on. There's a change of government. The Morrison government's gone, and now we have the Albanese Labour government in place. And so I'm wondering, is the situation the same? I want clarification, or whether this is still the same situation for the indemnity issue. So I write to the government about this. And so I get a response from the government, and they are confirming that rather than putting in place a medical indemnity scheme for health professionals, the former government established the no-fault scheme, which is vaccine claim scheme. And so while that was put in place, it was intended to support increased participation. But this letter is also confirming informed consent should be obtained for every COVID-19 vaccination, as per usual consent procedures for other vaccinations. So it's clear here, they have an obligation to get consent. And if they haven't gotten consent, they are not going to be protected from liability. Now, in the current situation where the legal system is so atrocious and has provided no protection to the public, good luck with trying to get anywhere with that. But we just need to get this talked about in public, because people have to realise there hasn't been any genuine informed consent. And I'm also making the point about these practitioners who are giving these injections. There's a famous case in Australia, which is Rogers versus Whittaker. That's the case that underpins informed consent. And this was a case where a woman had a problem with her eye, and she went to an eye specialist, and it all turned out very badly, and she ended up blind in both eyes. And she ultimately won a case against this specialist because he hadn't properly informed her about all the issues. And so you think about that now. We've got a situation where a person goes to a supposed expert one-on-one. But with vaccination, we have got millions of people being ordered to front up for a medical intervention, which they're not allowed to even think about or question. And the people who are administering the intervention, the practitioners, they have no idea about the disease or the vaccine products. They're not allowed to question the products. It's a diabolical situation which has not been properly called out. That's what we're dealing with. So I'm taking the attitude of these practitioners. They're just following orders. They were ordered to follow the vaccine rollout by AHPRA. They were terrorised into complying with that. So they're just following orders. But do they not realise they have an obligation to obtain informed consent? And I'm saying you should not have followed immoral orders. You should have, when there were mandates in place, you knew that was happening. You were mandated yourself. What has gone so wrong in the medical profession here that you are not capable of questioning this breakdown for informed consent? And the problem goes back to no jab, no pay in 2016. The fact that wasn't called out then, it had just set everything in place. And now it all has to come out into the open. So I'm just going to say it one more time. Informed consent should be obtained for every COVID-19 vaccination, as per usual consent procedures for other vaccinations. The Australian government has advised Emma MacArthur and me personally on this. In contemporary, this is to the Times. And at the very same time, mandates were in place. People were being menaced into submitting to these medical interventions, an absolute conflict that it seems hardly anybody was able to call out in the massive ASH experiment. So I've done quite a long paper on all this with my experience in working on this and correspondence and what have you. So it's an 11,000 word paper. And I picked up this idea of this misfeasance in public office tort, that possibly politicians and the officers that were pushing all this mandatory vaccination going against consent, that perhaps they've got a case to answer here. And maybe even the doctors and practitioners could be caught in this as well, because they're paid by Medicare. This was a taxpayer-funded intervention. Now, going to court, though, it's like, Charles Dickens' Bleak House, Jarndyce and Jarndyce, like, don't go to court, we'll just ruin you. I mean, how can you battle against people who are so wealthy with long pockets? How can an ordinary person succeed with that? And the legal system has been so terrible here that didn't seem to understand that practitioners had an obligation. They failed to understand that. So this now has to get out into the court of public opinion. That we've got to get this out there so people know what has been going on for the last 5 years, because the wretched media, which is, because the governments are obviously running this show and have captured the media, the ABC, which is funded by taxpayers, they gave us no critical analysis. In fact, the media was used as a propaganda machine. News services, we saw it was just constant rolling pressure and terrorizing. How do we now turn this around? And we've got to get this out to the people so that they know they have basically been just exploited and treated as prisoners in their own country. And that's just a little bit about me at the end, and my Substack and my websites, and also thanking my friend Emma MacArthur for her work and what she's done with informed consent, and also my friend Kate Smythe, who had lots of conversations with on these sort of subjects. So thanks very much for that. That's my little presentation.
Wow, that is amazing. Thank you so much. It's really fabulous. And it just, when you put it all together like that, just, and all those key moments, it's actually a horror show, isn't it? It's absolutely horrific. And how did people not see this? So I'd really encourage people, share this, because I think, we cannot let people just move on and forget, because that seems to be, I don't know whether you're finding this in Australia, but here people who really went along with this don't want to talk about it anymore. It's like, oh, that's done. That's COVID. Yeah, we've moved on from COVID. We cannot let that happen. We've got to hold people accountable. We've got to, actually right all the wrong that's been done, and also all the wrong thinking. Because I think, as you say, this is like precedents are really dangerous, aren't they? And we've now got this horrific precedent.
Please sign up to receive our newsletter and you'll be notified of UK MFA campaigns, open letters, calls to action and any important updates. You can do this on our website at ukmedfreedom.org. That's ukmedfreedom.org.
I mean, the stuff these politicians and doctors got away with saying and weren't called out for it at the time, and and then the damage that's caused. I don't know what your situation is with excess deaths and, people off sick and morbidity figures in the States. It's pretty bad. Sorry, not in the States, in Australia. It's really bad here. Are you seeing the fallout now of a very sick society?
Well, I actually stay very much in my lane. I let other people do that sort of thing. My thing is so simple. It's just, I just keep very simple. It does all of that, not that it doesn't matter, but as far as I'm concerned, it's just about informed consent. That's it. Nobody must be injected without their willingness to do so, to be threatened into. This is threats. And that's if people aren't really understanding what's happened. I'm not saying that the practitioners threaten people themselves, although I think a lot did. A lot of people did really threaten people in their clinics. I'm saying that the practitioners should have not collaborated at all with mandates. That is the major failing. And honestly, the Royal Australian College of General Practitioners, they are absolutely appalling. No accountability. They treat the public with absolute contempt. They are in bed with the Immunisation Coalition, which is funded by industry. It's funded by Pfizer and Moderna and Glaxo and MSD and Sanofi and CSL Seqirus. These are vaccine manufacturers, and Immunisation Coalition now is giving continuing education to these GPs. They are being directly, given education by the vaccine industry. It's just unbelievable. The general public doesn't know anything about this. We're constantly bombarded with, because we're heading into winter now, so the flu vaccines are being pushed. And we get these people, Professor this, that, and the other thing, Professor Paul Griffin from, whatever, going on about the vaccines, seldom mentioning that he's a member of the Immunisation Coalition, which is funded by industry. And these people are getting a platform all the time. They don't actually know anything detail about these vaccine products. I mean, I quote often that Fauci paper, Fauci and Co., I think Morans and Townberger, the paper that came out in January 23, where they actually admitted the vaccines don't work. And they've known it for years. This is what Fauci does. He actually puts this stuff in the journals. It's like he's covering himself for the future. It's in there admitting this. I've just written to the Royal Australian College of General Practitioners just recently, quoting that, saying, this is outrageous. This is fraud. People have been made to have these ridiculous products, and some people are mandated to have them. And we've got to blow this out of the water. People have to realise these colleges have been taken over, by people who are climbing up the greasy pole. They're not doing the right thing by the community. They need to be rebuilt from the ground up, because these organisations have just got no idea of ethical behaviour and being tied up with the vaccine industry. It's outrageous. And we've got no media. We don't seem to have any these investigative. We'd have to do this work ourselves now. We don't have. This isn't on Panorama or Four Corners here or whatever. We're doing the work ourselves, and it's very hard to get it out there. We're doing it on Substacks.
Yeah, I mean, the vaccine industry have been very clever, haven't they? Or the pharmaceutical industry in general. They have captured they've got these tentacles into every area that is going to influence how the public will be treated. So you've got academia, you've got, the medical profession, you've got all of the regulators, you've got the government, you've got the media. But you're right, it's literally about what's right and wrong. I mean, you don't need to have a degree in medicine to know what's morally right and what's morally wrong, what is acceptable. It's the basic thing that we tell our kids, isn't it?
Yeah.
You don't.
The last thing you need is a medical degree.
Body. I mean, without your consent, because otherwise that's effectively, I call it medical rape, because it's a violation of your body against your without your consent. So we should treat it in the same way. And I think as a society, we've lost our moral compass. And that's the thing we need to get back, because once we can see things for whether they're, good or evil, right or wrong, and people feel empowered to actually stand up for their fundamental intrinsic rights, this all ends. We don't, but it's trying to kind of connect people to that innate knowledge about what's right, what's wrong. And I think that's why the discussion on ethics, we found, especially in sort of the dark days of 2020, 21, 22, was really censored. It was censored so much more than data. That is the conversation they cannot afford for people to get out of their heads and into their hearts, and to actually go, this is wrong and this should not happen. It doesn't matter what the reason is. The reason we have ethics is for the difficult times, to protect people from being abused and exploited, to stop atrocities happening. So you can't just throw ethics out of the window in a difficult time. That's when you need them the most. And I think that's the thing people have lost the sight of, that's what they're there for. Ian, yeah. I'm sure you have loads of questions.
Oh boy, where do I start? Well, just tagging on from what you just said there. As you know, Liz and Elizabeth, I was a police officer in a past life, so I've a keen interest in criminal law. And of course, when you're talking about ethics, which then grew into common law, what we actually have, I think, there is a total breach of common law, because as soon as as you say, the informed consent goes out the window, you then have very, very serious crimes being committed against people and a number of different stages. And some time ago, pre my UKMFA time, I started to put together a flow chart of where these crimes were being committed at every stage, and the knowledge that people had all the way down the line, from when this all started, from then creating the jabs to what the contents of the jabs were, then who was going to administer the jabs, who was driving this, all these different stages. They were all committing very serious offences because they knew. And if they didn't know, well, they damn well should have done, because that was their job. Even down to the person putting a needle in someone's arm, the first thing, even at that point, they should have been asking, well, what's your medical background? I don't know what this is going to do to you. I don't know who you are. And that's not just a breach of ethics, that's a breach of criminal law. You're breaking the skin, you're injecting them with a substance. You have no idea what that is. You don't know who you're jabbing, what their background is, how it's possibly going to affect them. And even if they were sitting there for 15 minutes waiting to see whether they fainted or not, well, that doesn't matter, because we know people had serious injury days, months later, which has definitely now been attributed to these injections. The effect of lockdowns on people, the mental anguish, as you say, the coercion and the terror, the amount of terror that drove people still now sometimes to be walking around the streets wearing N95 masks on their face, sucking against their face because they haven't got sufficient oxygen. I mean, it's just bizarre, and and that is all an offence. That is all an assault on individuals, not to mention the poor people that have died as a result, which essentially, when they knew in advance, well, at the very least that's manslaughter, if not murder, because they knew. And the problem that you've got, and I think, and you were kindly saying it was a shambles. I think you probably meant that wasn't really a shambles. They knew exactly what they were doing, didn't they? And the effect that it's had, and I just find it so sad. It makes me angry. It makes me upset. And the most thing that I'm upset about is that our law in all of our countries, and it's all based upon the same legal system, let's face it, they have not responded and done anything about it, even when presented with the evidence, clear, concise evidence, even when they should act on reasonable suspicion. That was the one thing that was driven into us when I was a police officer. If you have reasonable suspicion that a crime has been committed, you need to report it and investigate it to the nth degree until till you can say, well, a crime hasn't been committed. But they wouldn't even take the case. And a number of cases have been submitted in the UK and probably other places around the world. It goes across the counter of the police station and an officer looks at it and discards it. You're lucky to even get a report number. And to me, that's the key to all of this. I've literally, I don't mind admitting, I've been in tears over this because I can't believe how disgraceful my former colleagues are because they've turned their backs on humanity.
And we saw real police brutality, didn't we, in Australia? You guys, we were watching videos of your protesters, your valiant protesters just being like truncheoned to the ground and chased. And I mean, it was horrific. And
they were shot at with rubber bullets
without masks on. And
they were shot at. They shot them with rubber bullets.
That's
in
right.
Australia.
I remember that video.
They used
how does it
energy
feel?
weapons against them.
How does it feel now, Elizabeth? Like in society, like have people lost trust for the police, for politicians, for the media? What's the kind of is there a way that how do we turn this around?
It's very complicated because so many people ended up going along with it. And so I think there's so many people went along with it. I don't think they realise how bad it was for people who weren't vaccinated. Because they simply complied, their lives went on. But there were people who weren't vaccinated. Now, I'm retired, so it didn't affect me job-wise. But people lost their jobs. And these are the people I put on the highest pedestal. I've been doing this for a long time, so I knew this was all dodgy. But these are people that this had hit them out of the blue, and that they were not going to submit to the vaccine. They were going to lose their job. People have lost their homes. People had rent to pay, children to look after. Imagine the fear of that, of being threatened. You're going to lose your job if you don't get this injection. And so people talk about vaccine injuries all the time. And this is where the courts, but how do the courts deal with political injury? The fact of people whose freedom was stolen, who were terrorized, depressed, like you were saying, you're in tears here and you were on your own. I mean, it was just so depressing to see the rug's been pulled out from underneath me. Nothing is what I thought it was. These countries, I'm just completely shocked and horrified. It's just blown everything out of the water. I don't believe anything anymore about this situation. I don't know what we do going forward, but this has to be addressed because this is part of a bigger picture. This globalization, they're making us comply with digital ID and all this. That if people don't wake up, getting rid of cash, they want everything to be monitored. Social credit system. This is such a big picture. Vaccination is just part of this. So far their system has now sort of like crashed a bit in that the vaccine passports haven't been put in place after all, but all the infrastructure's there for this. So we've got to get people woken up to this, and we've got to get people to be angry that they have been exploited like this. It's a disgusting situation. And what I think we have to do is we have to go after individuals, not speak in these generalities. We've got a Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation. Bill Gates was running the race for a coronavirus vaccine. What on earth is some software billionaire? He has been dominating vaccination policy internationally for years. He's basically running the WHO, running this at his own show. And people will say, oh, Bill Gates, not really, there's all this stuff behind him. I said, deal with what's right in front of you. He was doing this. He was basically running the race. Look at his Gates notes from the 30th of April, where he's laying down the law on what's going to be happening. He's laying down the law, and that's what happened. The enormous resources that got put into this. It's absolutely appalling. The waste of money, theft. We've been put into massive debt. Our countries are in massive debt, billions and billions of dollars. Small companies, small businesses ruined. We've got these corporations taking over everything. It's like, wake up, people. You think of your children and your children's children, of what we're walking into here. And one of the things, as well as consent, the big thing we've got to go after is privacy. Because if we get privacy back, their plans aren't going to work. We've got to get our privacy back. So they just can't keep data mining us all the time. and hooking us into this system where they're planning that we won't be able to do anything. If they don't like us, like they did with the Canadian truckers, they're planning to be able to just shut you off. They don't need to put you in the gulag. They can put you in the digital gulag where all of a sudden nothing will work. Oh, here we are paying thousands of dollars for these phones, which are being used as a mechanism to control us. It's like, wake up, people. And we should be getting now, going after these people who've caused all this damage and was saying, you are going to pay for this. You are going to pay for this. It's got to happen. We've got to go after particular people. And the people we have to go after, one of the groups you have to go after, is the practitioners. Those people who put the needles in the arm, we have to go after them because they did it. They put the needle in the arm. They have to realize you had an obligation to get consent for that. You didn't do it. You weren't qualified to even do this. You might have had some training course. I think in England they were even using hairdressers and air stewards and all sorts to stick needles in arms.
Shell stackers from Tesco's, people yeah, they were using those all sorts. But what you're saying is absolutely right. But you need to get the authorities to accept the complaints, and that is one of the problems that we found here. I mean, I was part of a team that put complaints over into a police station, and they literally, and I mean literally, turned the lights out in the police station and walked away. They wouldn't take it. So there'd been instructions from above not to take any complaints that involved anything to do with COVID, jabs, etc.
Because they've been treating people who question things as conspiracy theorists and ridiculing people who do this.
Yeah.
And we have to say, this is serious. We have to find a way for this to be taken notice of. And I think as the time goes by, we're in a very different place now than we were 5 years ago. We're an awful lot further down the track, and there's a lot now more people know about things and the PCR testing and everything like that. And we've just it's hard work. You guys have been doing all your hard work. I mean, I've been working on this for 17 years now. I know this is a long game, and once you get hooked into it, you're just your little person. You're doing your little bit, but we're just working into something to say, I'm sorry, you're wrong. And you didn't get informed consent, and now you're in serious trouble. And we've got to just identify these people. We had something called the Australian Biosecurity Act in Australia that was put in place in 2015, just like the no jab, no pay. This was like being planned for a long time. We need to go after the people. Who was behind the Australian Biosecurity? The people's names. Who is in that behavioural team? The nudge unit. The people's names. You've got, what's her name, that woman in England, Susan Mishi and what have you. These sorts of people, these people who are just knocking around in universities, who are these people? How come they've got this power to influence millions of people's lives? We've got to say, who are these people? Neil Ferguson. It's insane. Yeah. They could do these things that have had such a devastating effect on people, really get them out there, and we've got to find a way to do this.
You need a very good, strong. I think you need a very good, strong criminal barrister behind you, someone who really knows their law inside out. You need to have the paperwork very, very well written, and you need, strength of character and resolve to keep going back when you keep the knockbacks, and keep going back. But you're not giving them any opportunity to send the paperwork back. I mean, I remember seeing a document that got put in front of the International Criminal Court, and when someone showed me the document, I said, this won't go anywhere. And they said, why is that? I said, well, you've made a mistake on the front page. I said, that's all they need. They just need a spelling mistake, and they'll just knock it back. And I said,
there's a case here, a vaccine injury case that's just being heard here, and it's been sort of chucked out and said it was a shambles. So if you've got people who aren't capable of doing the job properly, and they're being paid loads of money, they're taking the people's money, they're taking their hope, and then when they fail, they are setting these precedents. It's like, don't go to court unless you are properly set up, because you're just causing a major problem for other people. And that's why I've always been very dodgy on the law. I just don't trust the law. It's so expensive. I feel these people, I mean, I've been working on this for years. I don't get many legal people coming to me to ask, I've been doing this for a long time, and yet they're going for these cases and they're not doing the obvious thing of it's the practitioner. Go after the practitioner. They didn't get consent. I've been raising this with people in the US. They go on about the PrEP Act. They go on, the magical PrEP Act, so protects everybody. And I'm saying I don't see how the PrEP Act protects the practitioner if they didn't get consent. if they vaccinated somebody who's under duress, we've got to get people to sort of use common sense. And I say, even if there is a law, I'm not obeying a bad law. If it's a bad law, people should question it. They've got the Jacobson judgment in America, you're probably familiar with, that, from years ago, smallpox. I did a Substack on that. And I found out that that's been used, and I don't think that should have been used as a precedent at all. Because at the same time they were letting that Jacobson case go through, there were other medical cases where informed consent was being recognised. And America is such a bad country as well, just like Australia. They've had compulsory vaccination for children with state laws for years. And it's like there's just the obvious problem has been in place for years. And until that's addressed, as in there shouldn't be state laws, mandatory vaccine laws for children. There shouldn't be mandatory laws for military people or for medical people. It might seem like, military people should be protected for this, that, and the other. But when we know that the vaccines are often just rubbish or possibly harmful or whatever, no, just because you've joined the military doesn't mean you've given your body over to the state, or it shouldn't do. It puts a whole new view on conscription. And I was looking in Australia, I've raised the question of whether the practitioners were effectively conscripted to support this rollout, which would be in contravention of the Australian Constitution. And I haven't really got an answer back on that yet. And I wasn't saying that practitioners would be conscripted to give the injections. You couldn't make them inject, but they were conscripted to not question the rollout via that position statement. How can you imagine you as a medical practitioner, you're giving a medical intervention, you're not allowed to question that medical intervention. How can you possibly get informed consent for something that you or yourself are not allowed to question? It's that sort of obvious thing to us has got to come out into the public domain, because the public is blinded by voices of authority. Like that guy, the Australian AMA Queensland president demanding everybody gets vaccinated. Who is he to be saying this? He's just some sort of, neck surgeon, but because he's a doctor and he's the AMA president, it's like he's got the right to be telling everybody what to do. It's like people got to wake up and push back against this authority that has got no standing.
It's interesting, actually, that you had the word traitor on your picture, because I wonder if they are actually committing treason,
Absolutely. I think they're committing treason against the people. Yeah, we've got our Scott Morrison there. I think they're committing treason against the people. If you're in a free country and you've got a prime minister who's behind trying to get everybody vaccinated to create a massive vaccine industry and an obedient population, well, that's not a free country, is it? We've just had Anzac Day here, which is, that commemorates the soldiers lost in the war. And I feel like it's a mockery now. I feel like I just feel it's just awful. I can't believe in this anymore, because when the chips were down, where were people? Anzac Day doesn't mean anything now, because of COVID. It's just the most shameful experience in our history, and most people still don't realise it, of how shameful this is for Australia that they went along with this. Because while the people went along with it, they didn't want to go along with it. It was like they were sideswiped, and it just came out of the blue. All of a sudden, it's not that serious. I don't want to have the vaccine. All of a sudden, you're being told, well, if you don't get the vaccine, you're going to lose your job. It's like people just didn't know what to do, because it was such a shock. What do you do in that situation? You're not expecting that, and so many people wouldn't fight back against it because the implications were too serious straight away. Businesses could be shut down. They could lose their business. People might lose their home. That's why they weren't able to fight back, because they were cornered, basically. And so a crime has been committed. People have been imprisoned. So people did this. There were 26 million people imprisoned in the country. We couldn't leave the country for 2 years. Only if you were special could you do that. But most people just couldn't do it. A lot of people couldn't get back. They created all this theatre around this COVID. It's just ludicrous to think about it now. We're effectively back to normal now. And it's like people are saying, don't mention the war. Like they don't want to talk about it. Don't want to talk about it. Still be some people who line up for their jabs and what have you. But it's like it didn't happen. It's like you've got to remember what happened. They had you wearing masks, and you had to wear a mask standing up. And when you sat down, you could take it off. It was just so horrible to live with. And because I was just looking at other people, because all people I know were going along with this. And it was just so frustrating that why aren't other people questioning that this is so stupid that you can take the mask off, you can talk to each other and eat a meal together, but then you have to put it. It was all such a control thing. It was so humiliating. They were treating people like a herd, putting a muzzle on them, and there were academics here who were all these fear stories. They would come out like, people have got to have the vaccine. They've got to be. If you don't do this, everybody's going to die of COVID. And then you know what? They didn't. And those people have just crept back into the woodwork. And it's like they need to be hauled out and hauled over the coals for what they did in trying to deliberately terrorise the public. But what were you doing? That is definitely treason against the people.
So in the end, we've got to have the public will need to think, right, who vaccinated me? And then because in our country, I've always thought a good start is to actually just report somebody to the General Medical Council, the Nursing Midwifery Council, to say, this person injected me, I didn't want it, I was under duress, therefore they didn't follow informed consent. And then that person will have to be investigated. Now, whether it comes to anything, who knows, but it's very stressful being investigated. I think we've got to start getting personal responsibility back to healthcare professionals, because I think over the last 20 years, with all these protocols that have been coming in, we've ended up with everybody just deferring responsibility upwards. They say, well, I've been told to do this, so that's okay. Even if I feel a bit uncomfortable, it's okay, because that's not my responsibility. Somebody else has told me to do it. And I think people really cannot see this very sort of authoritarian, totalitarian system that is now very firmly in place. The structure has been tested and it worked. When you described all the stuff just now about what people were having to do, why are the historians not standing up and saying, this is totalitarianism? This is what, this idea that we live in a free democracy is completely belied by the fact that this happened for the last 4 years and we had no redress, so we had no way to fight back. So I think freedom of information requests are good, and I agree with you about letters. We need to write, we need to ask individuals, we need to publish those letters so that those individuals' names are public. So trying to hold people accountable, and I gather that someone's just had some success with a freedom of information document regarding Dan Andrews.
Yes.
Do you see that? What's the details on that? That it's come out that really he was going ahead with all these draconian policies without actually having the health backup or advice.
Yeah. That's what we got. That's what we're waiting to unfold. It's been sort of announced. They've been trying to suppress this for years, and I was doing this too. I was writing to the health minister back in July 21. And I was asking him, because it was him going to the Governor General, that was rolling over the emergency. It was rolling over every 3 months. And it's like, well, what is the emergency? So it's the same thing. And they didn't answer. So now this has been pressed in Victoria, because Andrews is out there front and centre telling everybody what to do and dictating this. And well, who are you to do this? And why? It's just incredible the power they had, what they were able to do. Victoria is an absolute basket case financially. It's wrecked from what's going on with this COVID thing. It's just ruined the economy and everything. This person, how on earth was he allowed to get away with this? And that's why the legal system is such an absolute dire thing. No checks and balances to protect us. So, I want to start targeting the legal system, saying what the heck was going on. There was a one in the Fair Work system, just sort of like the work system. There was a judge who challenged something on a flu vaccine case. She was arguing for informed consent. She got sent off for re-education. This is what was going on in this country. It's amazing. I made a complaint. I've made what they call it a notification here. When you complain about a practitioner to the regulator, it's a notification. So I made a notification about Paul Kelly because he's a registered medical practitioner. And I said, in his position as the chief medical officer, he was leading all these practitioners to break informed consent. He might not have been sticking the needle in the arm himself, but this is like a very special case here. This is not just, reporting some GP for looking at you sideways or something. This is the chief medical officer has led all these people to be mandating vaccines for people. It's just outrageous. Now, ARPA responded to me and said, oh, we put it on the record, but we can't deal with it because it's a policy issue. This is how they tried to fob me off. But at the same time, they put out a position statement making the practitioners follow government policy on the vaccines. This is what's happening. They are just getting away with this stuff all the time. And it's a big surprise for us all to find out that our political systems are so rotten, so corrupted. How has this happened? How have they been captured like this? Who's organised this to plant people like this into the system? You know, it's people with an agenda have planted. These people might not be malevolent in themselves, but they're in a hierarchy and they're not going to rock the boat because they'll get out. We've got a really dangerous medical system now, and that is full of compliant people. The people who refuse to be vaccinated and what have you, they've been given the push. You know, they might be getting back in now, but they were really treated in a really hostile way. And so you've got this system that has been trained to not question things. That means we're not going to be safe. You know, so this has all got to be examined now, and we've got to somehow get in contact with the right people and make some people get very worried about, you know, now hopefully Daniel Andrews is feeling the heat. You know, just as an aside, he plays golf, and now the golf courses have all banned him because he banned golf during COVID, you know, and so he wants to play golf, and they're saying ban him. So now finally the people are back. Where were they before when Andrews was carrying out all this sort of stuff? That's what frustrated me. But why is everybody going along with this? Because everybody was caught in this system because it was all so unexpected and shocking. It's like we didn't know how to fight back against it. But now we've got to take it all back and go after those people who told us all these lies. You know, all those people that all the unvaccinated people are dying and all this sort of stuff, all built on this rubbish data. And we've got to hold them accountable because they've caused a massive, massive damage.
Mm. And I think also people just need to start having the confidence to say no to things. I think we've certainly seen vaccination rates generally dropping in the UK. I don't know whether you're seeing some sort of backlash, you know, quiet backlash, people just not taking their children for immunisation or setting up homeschools or whatever to get them out of the coerced schooling mandate system. Because am I right that children can't go to school without like a whole host of vaccines in Australia?
Yeah, well, there's different rules and there's states and territories, but it's basically, yeah, you need to show you've got the vaccines that for the young children. You need to have those. But we've got, it's a womb to tomb schedule. I mean, years ago, pregnant women are being pressed to have COVID vaccines, flu vaccines, RSV vaccines, pertussis vaccines. It's amazing what's going on. That was unheard of for pregnant women to have to do this. They're interfering in the whole natural way of things. You know, I'm 65 and I'm a measles survivor. And apparently, according to my mum, it was no big deal. She was worried. I was her first child and she was only 19 when she had me. And she called the doctor to the house. And this was 1961, I think. And the doctor said, don't worry, it's the measles, it'll pass. You know, and your mother was home in those days and just looked after you. You were just sick for a bit and you recovered. And this, for me now, because this has been a journey for me, when I first started with pet vaccines in 2008, I mean, because I didn't have children myself, I wasn't aware of all this stuff. But I found out about the anti-vaxxers and I was like, oh, I'm not an anti-vaxxer. I'm against over-vaccination. I was so careful, you know, and that's why I was successful, because I didn't take this over-vaccination, anti-vaccination angle. But after doing this for 17 years, I'm out there. I'm questioning the whole lot. I just think it's absolutely mad to be injecting this muck into people, mass populations. Once you start thinking, there's that, you know, COVID, multi-dose vials of this stuff. What is that stuff? And it's in multi-dose vials. Are they shaking it up? What happens to the person who gets the dregs? And then there was all that story about, oh, it's got to be minus 70 degrees. And that went out the window. It was, the whole thing is a farce. As in, who came up with this idea of injecting mass populations with all of this stuff? 2-month-old babies getting a 6-in-1 shot with an aluminium adjuvant. Pneumococcal shot, aluminium adjuvant. And the Hep B at birth in Australia, they get it at birth, Hep B. And all these injections these little babies are getting, I mean, a big thing for me is aluminium adjuvant, but that's just incredible what's going on there, the way that's exploded in recent years. There's so much that has to be exposed, and the conflicts of interest. We've somehow, now we have to use COVID. This is now the line in the sand. COVID has been an absolute disaster. but it now must be the mechanism to open this all up and to demand accountability and say, this is just insane. This is an invasion of people. Why? This is a baby or a person. This is a human being that could be just a healthy person. Why is this idea that it's not healthy unless it's had massive amounts of medical stuff? Statins and at a certain age and proton pump inhibitors. It's like they're saying it up that you've got to have everything, all these products. And there was that guy, Henry Gadsden, who was with Merck. He came out, he's dead now. I think it was back in the 70s. And he was saying, there's the sick people. But what about all the well people? Yeah. We want to get everybody. And that's what they're doing. They are just looking at this as massive markets and they want everybody hooked in. The testing's the same thing. Testing for everything. Testing's causing problems as well. So this has got to be the moment where people like you are now going to be really demanding. We've just got to look at this whole stick, but there's so much money wrapped up in it. So many people are on the teat of this thing. How do we get back to people just looking after people's health?
Yeah, absolutely. So we should probably draw this to a close. Are there words of hope? I always think it's always nice to end with words of hope or a sense that something's happening or, do you think, I think they've gone too far and I think a lot of people have woken up and I think a lot of people have also realised that, this kind of Tower of Babel that human beings always try to build, don't they? Oh, we can beat nature. We can do better than everything. We are our own gods. And yet again, it's been shown to catastrophically fail. And I feel like people are a little bit more in tune with, their own power and hopefully, they can build on that and also how important communities are. Because we lost that for a significant amount of time, and that was just devastating. We're seeing the fallout, aren't we, with our children and mental health and all the other stuff. But I think maybe, I was talking in a previous podcast, someone in suffering there is always treasure to be had, and I just feel like this is a really important moment. And actually, the fact that we're talking and we're the other opposite sides of the world, there's a massive community now of people who have a different vision for a world that's not authoritarian, a world that's not, forcing medical treatments or any sort of interventions on anyone else, who want freedom and, who want humanity and have a better vision for medicine.
Yeah, well, I think people have woken up now. I mean, remember they tried monkeypox on, and now they're trying the bird flu. And I think people are just quietly just going to ignore it all. And the main thing for me, my goal, so I said I've got my little niche here, I'm just no mandates. There must be no mandates for anybody, not medical people, not military people, not children, not anybody. If there is a useful product, people will have it. Yeah. And I'm also looking at the schedule, as you probably have done as well. And you look at these individual things like measles, that they're treating it like it's unbelievable, the scare tactics all the time. And if there is anything going wrong with measles, let's ask, what have they done to generations of people by injecting in them with these, proteins and goodness knows what else. So it's like we need to get this looked at. But I just say, no mandates. If there's no mandates, they can't do this. Yeah. They only did it before because of the mandates. So we have now got to kill the mandates. That's my main goal. And a review of the schedule and conflicts of interest.
Amen. Thank you so much for joining us. I know it's probably really late at night there for you. What time is it?
No, it's only 20 past 8 now here.
Oh, okay. Night. Okay, you're not for it. But yeah, it's been an absolute joy to talk to you. And I know we're very like-minded on all these things, and it's just great to have contacts, people who believe just as passionately as we do that informed consent and medical ethics are a red line and you don't cross it no matter what. Thank you. Please keep us updated. We really want people to share this excellent presentation. I think what we might do is also clip it as a standalone as well as within this conversation, so it's easier to share, because I think that's a really valuable resource.
Oh, well, thank you very much for...
Thank you. Lovely to meet you, Elizabeth.
Great. And you too, Ian. Thank you very much.
That's a pleasure.
Thank you. See you soon. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.